The dark news from Kursk continues to come. Last time, we have informed that a unit of 50,000 North Korean and Russian troops was formed to organize a counter-operation in Kursk. Today, we are receiving news that the swords have been drawn. North Korea and Russia have mobilized and clashes have started. So what is happening in the Kursk region? Will the military alliance of North Korean and Russian troops succeed, or will it melt in the face of Ukrainian pressure? Let's take a closer look at the border town where the hot clashes are taking place. As is well known, Jong has sent 10,000 military personnel to Russia to fight on Vladimir Putin's behalf. Updates are coming in confirming that these troops are already engaged in active fighting. Vedant Patel, deputy spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, said that most of the 10,000 troops are already on duty in the Kursk region. Vedant Patel said that Russia's success on the battlefield using North Korean troops will largely depend on how well the Russians are able to integrate them into their military. The challenges the troops will have to overcome will include interoperability, language barriers, command and control, and communication. In addition to the Pentagon's statements, the Ukrainian and South Korean fronts also made statements about the current situation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that some of the 11,000 North Korean troops stationed in the Kursk region on the Russian border have come into conflict with the Ukrainian army. Zelensky said that Ukraine's advance in the region has tied up about 50,000 Russian troops who cannot be deployed to other Russian fronts on Ukrainian territory. South Korea's spy agency reported that North Korean troops were engaged in fighting in the Kursk region of Russia. The statements, as well as the operations on the front line, show that North Korean and Russian troops are acting together against Ukraine. The first joint offensive by Russian and North Korean troops to capture the Russian town of Malaya Lokhnya ended in disaster when Ukrainian forces destroyed most of the armored units that had to travel on paved roads before reaching their targets. Some of Ukraine's most elite and experienced units, including the 47th Mechanized Brigade, 82nd Air Mobile Brigade, 17th Mechanized Brigade, and 80th Air Mobile Brigade, were tasked with defending this area. Given the expertise and strong leadership of these units, they anticipated repeated large-scale Russian mechanized attacks along the paved roads leading to Malaya Lokhnya. Realizing that the Russians could only attack from two directions due to limited road access, Ukrainian commanders made preparations to counter the attack by deploying numerous drones along these roads and implementing remote mines. Both sides have sent some of their well-equipped brigades to the front line in Kursk, and the fighting continues to be intense. This is unlike anything we have seen since the beginning of the war. We cannot even compare it to Ukraine's efforts to defend Avdiivka in February this year. This was purely defensive, and Ukraine did not have the strength to hold on because their ammunition was critically low. The Russians entered the town and eventually took control. The difference here is that Ukraine seems to have no reservations about deploying its well-equipped brigades to defend the Russian territory it occupies in Kursk. Although the amount of territory Ukraine holds in Kursk has decreased slightly in the last 2 months, they still control about 700 square kilometers of Russian territory. Now back to the details of the operation. Soldiers of the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade, together with other units, stopped intensive Russian offensive operations in the Kursk region. This was reported by the brigade's press service. The Russians reportedly sent more than 30 units of equipment and battalion-sized personnel to the offensive. The Kremlin reinforced the 51st Airborne Regiment and the 810th Marine Brigade, and then threw troops into Ukrainian positions. The 810th Marine Brigade includes thousands of North Korean troops. On Tuesday, 30 Russian vehicles advanced in 5 waves toward the 47th Mechanized Brigade. The Ukrainians responded with mines, drones, and Stugna P anti-tank missiles, destroying 10 of the Russian vehicles. The first 3 vehicles exploded on mines. The survivors scattered and stumbled towards sectors held by other Ukrainian troops, which may include the recently reorganized 17th Heavy Mechanized Brigade. The 47th Mechanized Brigade reported that adjacent brigades were working on the remaining 20 armored vehicles. These were also destroyed by Stugna ATGMs and FPV drones of the Unmanned Systems Battalion. In another operation, Ukrainian territorial defense fighters completely eliminated a Russian assault group crossing the Sile River in the Kursk region. The 129th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade's Rugby Team Assault Company reported that the troops were eliminated after crossing the river. The Russian command sent fighters to the attack by boats without the support of armored vehicles. At least 7 Russian soldiers landed on the other side of the river and were immediately attacked by Ukrainian soldiers. Artillery and FPV attack drones were used to neutralize the soldiers. Russian soldiers immediately scattered in different directions and tried to hide in bushes and trees. According to the Ukrainian military, the Russian assault group was completely destroyed while crossing the Sile River. It is worth noting that the Russian strike group also included North Korean soldiers. However, there is no clear information on the liquidation of these soldiers. On the other hand, despite the record losses, the Russians show no signs of stopping. Russian President Vladimir Putin had given his forces until October 1st to retake Kursk. This was a deadline they clearly missed, but the Russian army has not achieved the desired success. The new deadline is apparently the inauguration of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump in January. Trump promised to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of his election, but he did not do so. It is unclear what he will do about Ukraine when he officially takes control of U.S. foreign policy 2 months later. In a post-election phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump reportedly proposed a ceasefire that would freeze the front lines. This proposal, which lacks any sanctions mechanism, would give Russia 25,000 square miles of Ukrainian territory. In return, Ukraine would control 250 square miles of Kursk, but only if Ukrainian troops can hold that piece of Russian territory until the potential ceasefire takes effect. Putin is willing to trade potentially thousands of Russian lives to ensure they don't hold on. The 47th Mechanized Brigade commanders clearly appreciate that there is no time for border raids and other distractions. The Russians were fully committed in Kursk a week ago. Now the Ukrainians are also fully committed. So what awaits Russian and North Korean troops under all these circumstances? Bringing North Korean soldiers to fight Russians in a foreign country, where neither actually wants to be, has not been the big coup Putin had hoped for. Instead, we got language barriers, culture clashes, and a lot of finger-wagging. If your idea of comedy involves serious casualties and diplomatic nightmares, this is a comedy of errors. North Korean troops attack Kursk, and from day one, it's a circus. Imagine 2 armies trying to fight side by side, but speaking completely different languages. The Russian soldiers say, "Take that hill," and the North Koreans say, "Go left." Before you know it, they are both easy targets for the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians are watching this mess like a bad reality show. It is impossible to talk about military tactics in such an environment. North Korea is used to guerrilla warfare, sneaky ambushes, hiding in the woods. Russia? The Russians come with tanks, heavy artillery, all the big guns. It's like trying to run in a 3-legged race with one man sprinting and the other crawling. The result? A big exposed flank and a big exposed plan. And the Ukrainian forces are not going to let it go to waste. This is where it really starts to unravel. A few days after arriving at the front, North Korean troops are being decimated. In just a few skirmishes, about 40 North Korean soldiers fall. 18 North Korean soldiers suddenly get up and leave the front line. The North Koreans say, "Sorry, comrade, we didn't participate in this mess," and disappear into the night. Russian forces are now wasting time trying to hunt down these deserters instead of focusing on the real battle. Meanwhile, Russia's attempt to retake Kursk is not going exactly as planned. November 11th, 2024 should be written on the calendar as the worst day in this whole ordeal for Russian forces. Nearly 2,000 Russian soldiers were lost trying to retake the positions from the Ukrainian defenders. It is a disaster of epic proportions, and the alliance with North Korea is proving to be a colossal failure rather than a regrouping. Now, let's talk about the absurdity of the Putin and Kim drinking champagne together routine. They clink glasses, they smile for the cameras, they try to convince the world that this is some kind of historic alliance. But what about those champagne glasses? They are not only sparkling, they are full of despair. For Putin, these photos are a distraction from the fact that things are not going well. For the Russian people, it's a look here moment, perhaps beginning to question why their sons and brothers were slaughtered in Kursk. For Kim Jong-un, it's a rare moment in the spotlight, showing North Korea's importance on the global stage. All the toasts in the world will not fix a failed military alliance. On top of that, the Russian and North Korean media are doing their best to keep this narrative of unity alive. There is even a doctored video circulating showing Putin and Kim toasting each other, drinking from their glasses to show mutual trust. But fact-checkers found it to be a big fat forgery. The video was reversed, edited, and re-edited to show a level of trust that wasn't there. These guys are not strategic partners. They are just trying to hold this shaky alliance together long enough to make their own people believe it. But what about the real story? It's a mess of mistrust, logistical nightmares, and nothing resembling real cooperation. This whole Kursk disaster is not just a tactical loss. It is a long-term liability. Russia's inability to use North Korean forces effectively makes them look even weaker on the global stage. Why would any other country want to cooperate with a country that cannot manage its own backyard? For North Korea, the situation is equally dangerous. Kim Jong-un may be enjoying his moment in the sun, but if news of how bad things are going reaches his country, it could weaken his iron grip on the North Korean military. Desertions and casualties among North Korean soldiers are on the rise. Despite the rise in casualties in the arena of war, Ukrainians are worried. And why is that? Ukraine and NATO are worried that the first few thousand North Korean troops sent to Kursk will be the first of many to follow. If Russia escalates tensions by allowing large numbers of foreign troops into the conflict, what is to stop NATO countries from sending their own troops to fight on behalf of Ukraine? With a small number of foreign volunteers already fighting on both sides, the involvement of NATO-approved troops would be a very different matter and would bring NATO and Russian forces into direct contact with each other. This would significantly expand the scope of the conflict and risk the formal involvement of NATO and the Collective Security Treaty Organization, a Russian-led alliance of post-Soviet states. Russia has chosen to bring North Korean troops into the war. There are a few thousand for now, but the possibility of large numbers of foreign troops joining the Russian forces is only a step away. So what does Russia gain from North Korean troops? Russia has spent heavily to cover Ukraine's attack on Kursk and its offensive on Donetsk. It has managed to contain Ukraine in southern Russia and is slowly advancing on Donetsk. Pokrovsk is struggling to stop Russian attacks on the Ukrainian city. All this has come at a great cost. An estimated 80,000 soldiers have been killed or wounded in these operations. This translates into about 100 casualties a day. Unsustainable losses, even for Russia. As Russia's forces, depleted after months of offensive, are at the point of exhaustion, troop reinforcements could be just what it needs. How will the Russians use these new troops? Probably by launching human wave attacks from the front, as they have done in the past with their own troops. Soldiers with no combat experience perform better in defensive positions. This allows more experienced troops, well-trained Marines, and paratroopers to participate in offensive operations to retake Russian territory held by Ukraine. To this end, Russia is massing infantry, artillery, and tanks in Kursk, and a new counteroffensive will soon begin. How will this affect the course of the war? The effects will be seen both near and far. There are two questions here. First, how will a successful Russian operation in Kursk affect the war? Second, what will be the impact of North Korea's role in this operation? Ukraine attacked and invaded Russia in a sudden move in the summer, catching the defenders unprepared and quickly seizing weakly held Russian towns and villages. Russia reluctantly withdrew its forces from Donetsk and reinforced them with troops from the Pacific fleets and other parts of Russia, slowing and halting the Ukrainian advance. Now those units are in place and ready. If Russia succeeds in pushing Ukrainian forces back to the border, Ukraine will lose an important bargaining chip in the final peace talks. It will also free up tens of thousands of Russian soldiers to fight in Donetsk, the focal point of the entire war. This would significantly increase Russia's chances of taking over the entire region. North Korea ratified the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement signed with Russia in June. The agreement is now in force and includes a mutual assistance clause if either party is attacked. Ukraine's incursion into Russian territory falls under this definition. So where does South Korea stand in the midst of this chaos? North Korea is sending munitions to Russia for use in Ukraine. Putin goes to Pyongyang and establishes a comprehensive strategic partnership, and North Korean special forces are deployed to support Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. Is there any doubt about what Pyongyang and Moscow want to do? It is now clear that Russia has chosen its partner on the peninsula, and it is not South Korea. It is time for South Korea to recognize this reality and stand with the Ukrainian people, the United States, and Europe. If Seoul chooses to give its full support to Ukraine, South Korean support could change the course of the entire conflict and even lead directly to a peace agreement. While European and U.S. allies have limited capacity to produce weapons critically needed in a protracted ground war like Ukraine, South Korea's world-class companies have continued to develop, perfect, and produce the weapons needed in an ongoing industrial war. Now, South Korean companies are world leaders in producing military vehicles, ammunition, automatic artillery, and other defense equipment that Ukraine urgently needs. While this may seem like a compelling argument for the South Korean government to step in and allow Korean companies to engage directly with Kiev, some argue that the donation or sale of lethal weapons could increase tensions with Pyongyang and Moscow. There is an equally strong case for supporting Ukraine, which has no interest in responding to what North Korea has done or will do. Instead of articulating red lines and implying that Korea might consider changing its policy and supporting Ukraine based on what North Korea and Russia have done, Korea should make its case based on two other key factors: South Korea's global role and responsibility, and the potential economic benefits to Korean companies and workers. Korean politicians on both sides of the aisle, along with many experts and academics, have long advocated and demanded G7+ membership for South Korea. There is a strong rationale in favor of offering Korea a larger global role that is in line with its economic and military strength and global reach. The G7 has been regularly intervening in the war in Ukraine and has openly and repeatedly sided with Ukraine against Russia because Russia chose to start an aggressive war, illegally redraw borders, and commit genocide. Ukraine deserves more than hesitation from Korean leaders about actions that could disrupt possible future trade with Russia or damage Moscow's role in future peninsula talks. This is not a global approach. South Korea must take a position consistent with the universal values it supports and embraces. Global leadership requires making compromises and taking tough decisions. and no Korean politician seems to be able to say with a straight face that not supporting Ukraine was the right choice based on global values. The surest way for global powers to accept Korea in the G7 Plus is for Korea to make the right choice and support Ukraine at all costs. Secondly, if Korea chooses to stand by the Ukrainian people, as Colombia, Greece, Ethiopia, the United States, and others helped South Korea during the Korean War, it will be a sure win for Korea, directly and indirectly. Indirectly, if Korea mobilizes its know-how and spearheads efforts to strengthen and protect Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and keep the Ukrainian people warm this winter, and if Korea sells its world-class weapons to Ukraine, allowing Ukrainians to counter Russian aggression and thus trigger an end to the conflict, Korea's global brand will gain value as leaders in Brussels and Washington, but also in Delhi and Bogota. Foreign leaders will recognize Korea's geopolitical arrival, and if Korean support is as decisive as I envision, Korea will logically receive diplomatic accolades that will resonate in other forums and lead to a more effective voice to advance Korea's interests around the world. More directly, there is much at stake and much to be gained. The European Union is ready to spearhead reconstruction efforts in Ukraine as soon as peace or a ceasefire is achieved. If Korea and Korean companies play a major role in catalyzing such a peace, the future participation of Korean companies in the $500 billion task of rebuilding Ukraine would not only be secured, but could also pave the way for Korean companies to establish a significant presence in Ukraine, a country that is an affiliate of the European Union and the world's largest market. What could this mean? Not only would it mean automobile, artillery, and battery factories in Ukraine, but Korean construction companies could find themselves at the top of the list for building airports, highways, and apartment buildings. It could prepare to play a leading role in rebuilding Ukraine's energy grid. The time has come for Korea to help the Ukrainian people. If Seoul takes this difficult decision, it will benefit the Ukrainian and Korean people and could transform Korea's global status and global role. So what do you think about this issue? We will be glad if you specify in the comments. Thank you for watching us. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like to support us.